everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always fun to be back.
So this is something we get asked about a lot. Is weight training actually safe for kids?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those topics where people have, strong opinions.
Yeah, for sure. Seems like everyone's got an opinion, but luckily we got some sources sent in that can maybe help us get past just opinions, right?
Definitely. It's always good to have some evidence to work with,
Yeah,
sort through all the noise.
absolutely. So for this deep dive, we've got a super interesting article sent in from LPS Athletic. It's called "Is Weight Training Safe for Children?"
Oh, interesting. I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're not just any gym. They train serious athletes. Some even go on to compete at the Olympic level. So their perspective on this is, I think, going to be really valuable.
Definitely. High-level athletes, they really have to pay attention to those long-term effects, what's actually good for the body over time.
Exactly. And just to make sure we're not just hearing from one source, we've also got statements from a whole bunch of organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Right, that's the one a lot of parents, they look to them for guidance.
Exactly. And there's also the American College of Sports Medicine, American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine.
Wow, so we're getting the medical perspective.
We are, and there are even more. British Association of Sports and Exercise Science, the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology, the National Strength and Conditioning Association, and let's see, last but not least, the United Kingdom Strength and Conditioning Association.
Okay, so it's not just fitness gurus. We've got doctors, scientists, the whole shebang.
We do. So we're looking at this from all angles. So let's start with LPS Athletic. What's their take?
Well, the thing that really jumped out at me right away from their article was their stance on Olympic weightlifting for kids.
Okay, yeah, that caught my eye too.
Like, they actually consider it one of the safest forms of weight training,
Right.
which I gotta admit kind of surprised me.
Yeah, same here. I think most people would assume, Olympic weightlifting. That's got to be too intense for kids.
Right, like way too extreme.
So what's their reasoning there? What makes them think it's safe?
Well, they really emphasize that, when it's done correctly, Olympic weightlifting, it actually prioritizes good technique over just lifting super heavy weights.
So it's not about maxing out your lifts.
Nope, not at all. It's about teaching kids the right form, the right movement patterns. And that, they say, is what helps prevent injuries.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you're focused on doing the movement correctly, you're less likely to hurt yourself, even if you are lifting, a weight that's challenging for you.
Exactly. It's all about building that solid foundation of strength and good movement mechanics that they can then build upon as they grow up.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
But-
So it sounds like LPS Athletic isn't alone here, right? You mentioned all those other organizations that have looked into this, like the American Academy of Pediatrics. What's the consensus from the medical community, the sports science world about kids and strength training?
Well, all of those organizations we mentioned, they actually endorse strength training for kids.
Yeah.
Of course, the big caveat is it has to be done safely,
Yeah.
with proper supervision.
Right. Safe and supervised, of course.
But yeah, it's pretty significant, especially when you consider the American Academy of Pediatrics. A lot of parents really trust their recommendations.
Absolutely. So it seems like there's more to this than just lifting weights is bad for kids.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely more nuance to it than that.
Okay, but there's got to be a but coming, right? Because we all grew up hearing that lifting weights stunts your growth.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's the classic concern, right? Like, oh no, if my kid lifts weights, they'll be short forever.
Right. That was the first thing anyone ever told me about weightlifting. So do these organizations address that?
They do.
Mm-hmm.
And based on all the research we have now, they actually debunk that myth completely. Proper weight training, it doesn't damage those growth plates, the parts of the bones where kids are still growing.
So lifting weights doesn't automatically equal a shorter kid?
Not at all. In fact, when it's done with good form and the right amount of weight, it can actually strengthen their bones, makes them healthier in the long run.
Wow. Okay, so that's a big one to cross off the list of worries. No evidence to support that stunted growth claim. Seems like we're seeing a trend here, When it's done right, weight training might not be as scary for kids as we thought.
Right. It's all about challenging those assumptions we grew up with.
Exactly. So there's got to be some research to back this up, right? Aside from just expert opinions.
Oh, absolutely. There's a fascinating study that really supports this idea. It was done by a researcher named Brian Hamill, and it was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research.
Okay, so legit research here.
Definitely. And what Hamill did was he looked at weightlifting programs in British schools. He compared the injury rates in those programs to the injury rates of other sports.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. I'm curious, what sports did he compare it to, and what did he find?
Well, he looked at a whole range of sports that are common in British schools, things like soccer, rugby. And what he found was honestly pretty surprising. Weightlifting actually had a lower rate of injury compared to these other sports.
Wait, hold on. You're saying weightlifting was safer than soccer and rugby? I did not see that coming.
It's wild, right?
Uh,
I mean, it makes you really rethink things. And this finding, it really lends support to the idea that weight training, when it's supervised and it's done with proper technique, can actually be a really safe activity for kids.
That is a huge takeaway. So far, it seems like the science is pretty clear. Supervised weight training might not just be safe for kids, but it could even be beneficial for their health and, just how they develop overall. And just to be clear, we're not talking about, like, turning kids into bodybuilders here.
No, not at all.
It's got to be about more than that.
It is. It's so much more. It's about building the kind of strength they need for everyday life. It's about making their bones healthier. Some people even think it can help boost their confidence.
Yeah, and all of that is super important, especially as kids are growing up.
Definitely. But here's the thing that keeps bugging me. If it's so beneficial, if all these experts are saying it's good, why are so many people still hesitant about kids and weight training? Like,
Yeah.
what's behind all that doubt?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's like we've got the evidence, we've got the expert opinions, but there's still this, like, cultural fear around it. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I have a few ideas about that, but I think it might be a conversation for the next part of our deep dive. Got to give people something to look forward to.
You're right. You're right. We've covered a lot of ground already.
Mm.
So just to recap, for everyone listening, what have we learned so far? We've seen that a whole bunch of really reputable organizations, like, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they're actually for strength training for kids. As long as it's done safely with the right guidance. We've also learned that whole stunted growth thing is just a myth, no evidence to back that up. And get this, weightlifting, when it's taught right, might actually be safer than some of the other activities kids are already doing.
It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah,
It really challenges a lot of the stuff we just assumed was true.
it does. And it makes you wonder, if all this is true, why are we still so scared of it? What's really behind that fear and those cultural beliefs?
Yeah, lots to unpack there. And we're going to do exactly that in part 2 of this deep dive. We'll dig into what safe and effective weight training really looks like for kids in practice. We'll explore all those potential benefits, not just, the physical stuff, but the mental and social stuff too. And we'll tackle that big question head on. Why, despite all this evidence, are so many people still hesitant about weight training for young people? Should be a good one.
Sounds great. Can't wait to dive into all of that. So everyone listening, we'll be back soon with part 2 of our deep dive into weight training for kids. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back everyone for part 2 of our deep dive on weight training for kids. So we ended part 1 on kind of a cliffhanger, right? If weight training can actually be good for kids, why are so many people still hesitant? Like, what's with all the fear?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot to unpack there.
But before we get to all that, I think there's something else we need to talk about. We've been talking about safety, we talked about expert opinions, but what does safe and effective weight training actually look like for kids, in the real world?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's important to have a picture of what this actually looks like in practice. Luckily, those same organizations we mentioned before, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Sports Medicine, all of them, they actually have guidelines for how to do this right, how to approach weight training with young people.
Okay, so it's not just like let them loose in the weight room.
Not exactly. There are definitely some structured recommendations to make sure it's done safely and, in a way that actually benefits them.
So what are some of the key things to keep in mind? Like, what are the biggies?
Well, the absolute most important thing, and this might seem obvious, is supervision.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But I'm not just talking about, like, having another adult in the room. This needs to be qualified adult supervision, someone who really understands how kids develop and who knows the ins and outs of safe weightlifting techniques.
So it's not enough to just have, like, a parent there or the gym teacher.
Right. It needs to be someone with expertise in this specific area.
Okay, so kind of like you wouldn't send a kid to learn piano from someone who's never played piano before, right?
That's a great analogy. Weight training is the same. You want a teacher who can show them the right way to do things, who can watch their progress and make adjustments based on how each kid is growing and developing.
Makes sense. So, qualified supervision, that's number one. What else is important?
Well, another big thing is making sure everything's age appropriate.
Right, right, obviously.
The whole program needs to be tailored to where the kid's at, their age, their developmental stage. We're not going to be throwing heavy weights at like an 8-year-old.
No kidding.
The focus should be on building that basic strength, coordination, mastering their own body weight first. Then maybe later on, they can move on to external weights.
So, starting slow, focusing on form, having an expert guide them, it seems like a lot of this comes down to quality over quantity, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that actually brings us back to the types of exercises themselves. What movements are actually appropriate for kids?
Yeah, good question. Because I remember we talked about how LPS Athletic, they actually recommend Olympic weightlifting as a safe and effective option,
Exactly.
which is pretty surprising to a lot of people, I think.
It is, but remember, Olympic weightlifting, it's all about being precise, being in control,
Hmm.
which actually fits perfectly with what we've been talking about, quality over quantity,
Mm,
focusing on good form.
right, right. It all connects. But what about other kinds of weightlifting? Are there certain exercises that are just like better suited to younger athletes?
Well, a lot of the classic movements can be safe and beneficial as long as they're done right and with the right amount of weight.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? Give me some examples.
Think about things like squats, lunges, presses, rows, those kinds of movements.
Got it. Pretty basic stuff.
Yeah. And the cool thing is they mimic the ways we move naturally, in everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
So the strength kids build, it actually translates into things they do all the time outside of the gym.
Oh, so it's not just about like being able to lift a certain weight. It's about building strength that actually helps them in their lives.
Exactly. Functional strength.
I like it. And hey, we shouldn't forget about body weight exercises either, right? Like those can be really effective too.
Absolutely. Things like push-ups, pull-ups, squats, lunges. You can do a whole workout with just your own body weight. And those are great starting points, especially for younger kids or anyone who's just starting out with weight training.
Yeah, that makes sense. Build a solid base first, then start adding more challenge as you get stronger.
That's the idea. Gradual progression. It's safer and it's better for their development in the long run.
Cool. So it sounds like a well-rounded weight training program for kids. It's not just about lifting weights. It should also include some flexibility stuff, balance training, things that help with coordination.
Spot on. The goal is overall athleticism, not just building big muscles.
Right. It's about teaching them how to move well, how to use their bodies.
Exactly. And, there's another layer to all of this that we haven't really talked about yet, and that's the psychological benefits. There's actually a lot of research now showing that weight training can have a really positive impact on kids' self-esteem, their body image.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that. Tell me more about that.
Well, think about it this way. Weight training, when it's done in a supportive environment, it can be super empowering for kids. It teaches them that their bodies can do amazing things, that they can set goals and reach them if they work hard and stick with it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like they're learning to believe in themselves, believe in what their bodies can do.
Exactly. And that could be such a huge confidence booster, especially during those, middle school, high school years when self-esteem can be a little fragile, to say the least.
Totally. Especially in a world where kids are constantly bombarded with messages about how they should look, unrealistic body ideals and all that.
Right. Weight training can help them shift their focus to what their bodies can do, not just how they look. It's like inner strength, capability instead of just outward appearance.
Love that. And hey, let's not forget about the social side of things too, right? If kids are doing this together in a group setting, it can really help them build teamwork skills, learn how to communicate, just, bond with their peers.
Totally. It's like any team sport or activity. It brings people together, teaches them how to work towards a common goal.
Yeah, they're cheering each other on, celebrating each other's successes. That's awesome. So it sounds like weight training can be beneficial for kids physically, mentally, and socially. Like it really can impact their lives in a whole bunch of different ways.
It's a pretty incredible thing when you think about it. So much potential there.
Okay, so we've talked about the guidelines for doing this safely, all the different benefits, but I'm still stuck on that question from part one. If all this is true, why is there still so much hesitancy? Why are people still afraid of letting their kids try weight training?
It is a paradox, isn't it? We have the experts backing it up, the research showing it's safe and even good for kids, and yet that doubt just lingers.
It does. Like, what's going on there? I think it's time to try and unpack those cultural beliefs and fears that might be at play here.
Yeah, let's dive into that. What do you think might be some of the things that are fueling this hesitation, even though we have all this positive evidence?
Well, to me, it seems like one big one is the way we just think about weight training. Like, a lot of people see it as something that's only for adults, especially adults who are trying to, get super buff or compete in bodybuilding competitions.
Right. It's almost like there's this stereotype that it's this super masculine thing, for grown-ups only.
Exactly. And that image, it just overshadows everything else. People forget that weight training can be for anyone, any age, with any goal.
Yeah. We need to broaden our understanding of what it actually is
Yeah.
and all the different things it can offer.
Totally. So part of the problem is just these outdated ideas about weight training, right? But I think it goes deeper than that.
Oh, definitely. I think another big factor is just plain old fear.
Fear. Like of what?
Fear that their kid's going to get hurt, fear that it's somehow unnatural for a kid's body, too intense.
It's funny because, we just saw that when it's done right, it's actually pretty safe. Possibly even safer than other things kids are already doing.
I know. But fear, it's not always rational, right? It comes from not understanding something, not being familiar with it.
I get it. It's like people imagine these huge bodybuilders grunting and lifting these crazy heavy weights, and they assume that's what all weight training is. But we know that's not true, right? Especially not for kids.
Totally different approach. It's all about starting slow, building that foundation, learning the right way to move.
So maybe a big part of getting over this fear is just education.
Oh, for sure. People need to know that weight training for kids isn't about pushing them to the limit, making them into mini Schwarzeneggers. It's about helping them move their bodies in a healthy way, build some strength, and maybe gain some confidence along the way. Education's huge.
Yeah.
And I think the way the media portrays weight training also plays a role.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, we often see these headlines about people getting injured while lifting weights. Usually it's some extreme case, really rare.
Yeah.
But those stories, they stick in our minds more than all the times it goes well, all the kids who benefit from it.
Yeah, it's like that saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Bad news always gets more attention.
Exactly. And it ends up giving people this, distorted view of weight training, making it seem way riskier than it actually is.
So we've got these old-fashioned ideas about weight training being just for adults. We've got fear based on a lack of understanding. And then we've got the media throwing in these scary stories. It's no wonder people are hesitant.
Right. It's like a recipe for doubt.
Even when we have all this evidence, all these experts saying, hey, this is actually good for kids.
Exactly. It's complex. But I think the bottom line here is we need to have an open mind. We got to be willing to look past all that fear and all those misconceptions that we've kind of inherited,
Totally agree. It's about replacing that fear with knowledge, understanding that weight training, when it's done right, it can actually be a really powerful tool for kids. It can help them physically, mentally, emotionally.
It's about seeing the potential instead of just focusing on the risks.
Well said. So we've talked about the guidelines, the benefits, and now we've even started to unpack some of the reasons why people might be hesitant. But, there's one more piece of the puzzle here that I think is super important.
That's that.
Finding the right people to guide kids on this journey. We've touched on supervision, expertise, but I think it's worth really emphasizing that the coach, the trainer, whoever's guiding them, that can make all the difference.
Oh, absolutely. Having a coach who knows their stuff and who really gets kids, that's essential.
So let's talk about that. What should parents, coaches, anyone who's thinking about this for their kids, what should they be looking for?
We'll get into all of that and more in the final part of our deep dive. Don't go anywhere.
And we're back. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into weight training for kids. So before the break, we were talking about how important it is to find the right people to guide kids in this whole weight training thing. People who really know what they're doing, who can make sure it's done safely and effectively.
Absolutely. It makes a huge difference. I mean, we've talked about all the potential benefits, but those benefits only come when it's done right. You got to have someone in the kid's corner who knows how to do this properly, someone who gets kids.
Right, because having a good coach is important in, anything, right?
Yeah.
But especially when we're talking about kids, their health, their development, you want to make sure they're in good hands.
Exactly. You want someone who's not just going to, throw them into the weight room and say, go lift.
Right, no kidding. So let's say a parent or a coach, they've listened to all this and they're thinking, okay, this makes sense. Weight training could be good for my kid. Where do they even begin? How do you go about finding the right person to guide them?
That's a great question. And it's something, honestly, a lot of people don't really think about. But it's crucial. So the first thing I always tell people is to look for certifications, credentials. There are organizations out there that specifically certify professionals who work with youth fitness.
Okay, so we're not just looking for like the biggest guy at the gym.
No, not at all. I mean, muscles don't equal knowledge, right?
Right, right. So are there like specific organizations to look for?
Yeah, definitely. The National Strength and Conditioning Association, they have a certification specifically for youth fitness. USA Weightlifting does too. And those kinds of certifications, they show that this person, they've gone through the training, they've passed the test, they've shown they know what they're doing, especially when it comes to kids.
So it's like proof that they've got the knowledge and the skills to work with young people safely.
Exactly. But it's not just about certifications. Experience is super important too.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, has this person actually worked with kids before?
Right, exactly. What's their track record like?
Yeah.
Have they helped other young athletes get stronger, develop their skills without any injuries? Those are things you want to find out. And then there's the less tangible stuff. Personality.
Yeah, because working with kids is different than working with adults.
Right.
You got to have a certain, I don't know, way about you.
Oh, totally. The right coach, they're going to be able to connect with kids on their level, make the training fun, keep it engaging, but at the same time, still make sure everyone's being safe, using good technique. It's a tough balance.
It is. Like, you got to be a good teacher, a mentor, but also, an authority figure.
Right. All at the same time. So yeah, personality matters a lot. You're someone who can inspire the kids, make them excited about learning and pushing themselves, but also someone who's going to instill good habits and a solid foundation.
It sounds like finding the right coach is almost as important as finding the right teacher for your kid.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's that crucial. And another thing that's super important is communication.
Okay. In what way?
Well, you want a coach who's a good communicator, someone who can explain things clearly, both to the kid and to the parents or guardians. They should be able to lay out the whole training program, talk about any concerns you might have, and give you regular updates on how the kid's doing.
So it's not just about the coach doing their thing, it's about being on the same page with the parents, too.
Absolutely. It should be a team effort, everyone working together. And, finding that right fit, it might take a little time. It's okay to shop around, talk to a few different coaches, check out different facilities, maybe even let the kid do a trial session or two.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of like try before you buy.
Exactly. You want to make sure it's a good match for everyone involved. Because at the end of the day, it's the kid's experience that matters most.
Couldn't agree more. So you found the right coach, everyone's happy. What then? Like, what else should parents and coaches keep in mind as they go through this process with their kids?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just remembering that every kid is different.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What works for one kid might not work for another. Some kids are going to jump right in and love the structure, the challenge. Others might need more time to get comfortable, maybe a different approach altogether.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Nope. Got to be flexible, pay attention to each kid's individual needs, and adjust the training as you go. That's where having a good coach really makes a difference.
Totally. They can kind of tailor things to each kid.
Exactly. And I think the other really important thing is to focus on the process, not just the outcome.
What do you mean by that?
Well, weight training, like anything worth doing, it's a journey. It's not about getting to some specific destination. It's about what you learn along the way. There are going to be good days, bad days, challenges, setbacks, all of that.
Yeah, that's life, right?
Exactly. And weight training can be a great way to teach kids how to embrace that journey, how to enjoy the challenge, learn from their mistakes, celebrate their wins, all of it.
So it's not about turning every kid into a weightlifting champion.
Nope. It's about helping them grow, become stronger, more confident, and develop a good relationship with their bodies.
It's about giving them the tools to lead a healthy, happy life.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from debunking all those myths to talking about the science, the benefits, the practical stuff, like finding a good coach, and even the bigger picture, like why this is still such a controversial topic.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It has. Hopefully everyone listening has learned something new, maybe even changed their mind about a few things.
I hope so. The more we know, the better choices we can make, right?
Absolutely. And remember, the learning never stops. There's always more to explore. So, to all our listeners out there, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper. And if you have a topic you'd like us to deep dive into, send in your requests. We're always looking for new adventures. Until next time, happy diving.